This is the End of the Road podcast with your host, Michael Coco. Exploring the horizons we never touch because we're already there.
Welcome, and thanks for listening. Tonight we're off to the Baltimore area with Edjlali, former NASA engineer who's turned his very focused attention on the mindfulness community. And what I love about Mo and his new book called Open MBSR is not only his wonderful insights that he's taken from the tech industry and merged into making the mindfulness community something more than it is right now, but he's so wonderfully mischievous, and he's a troublemaker. And you gotta like troublemakers. I think they call them in the tech industry disruptors. And in doing so, Mo deals in all these paradoxes, the paradox of technology and silence that mindfulness engenders. Or as the Sufi mystic Ibn Arabi once said, "Therefore thou knowest light by its opposite. Opposite reveals opposite in the process of coming forth." So here we go. Without further ado, coming forth is Mo Edjlali. Well, let's talk about Open MBSR, and I thought maybe an easier way to dive into it is not necessarily describing what it is, but maybe what it is not. Perhaps it would because it's so sort of open and all encompassing. Maybe that might be a better way, but I'll defer to you.
Boy, that's an interesting approach. I can't say that I've thought of it that way. What it's not, and I mean, I could tell you when they approached me to do the book. So I got approached by Wiley to do this book almost 4 years ago, and I think that they were looking for something around mindful leadership. Like one of these books, like follow these 4 simple steps, and your life will be perfect. Like all you have to do is this one easy thing, and the whole, everything will be fine. So it's not that.
Exactly. And there's like a proliferation of those just like everywhere. Just like try to simplify it, and the uncomfortable reality is it's the other direction.
Exactly. And I appreciate you saying that and being clear about that, because I do feel that there is an unfortunate trend that often will play on people's deep desires to find peace, to find happiness, to find joy, to find belonging. And often, unfortunately, in the mindfulness field and adjacent fields, there is a lot of preying on innocence in ways that sometimes I feel is intentional. Sometimes I feel is almost like subconscious, like people don't even know what they're setting up and know what they're doing. So to come back to your question, I think that the book is not pushing forward the current state of things. It's not kind of fitting the mold. It's very intentionally trying to be provocative and sort of to kind of cut through the noise and to get people to think in ways that often seem lacking in the mindfulness field.
Sure. Now, your background is in software, and I think one of the maybe tools that, maybe this isn't what we should call it, but you talk about sort of the intersection of technology and sort of this mindfulness practice, and and the examples you give in the book of the agile software orientation, and
Yes.
and I thought that was really interesting. Bringing that in, and I know that like even the Dalai Lama is interested in bringing more technology to sort of practices of meditation and things like that.
Well, to be clear, Michael, so I do. We actually just launched a web app called Meditate Together that I'm happy to talk a little bit about, where we're actually applying technology to helping create this community-based type environment that people could experience, and a guru-less kind of setup, and almost like a Quaker sort of vibe to it, right? And so there's a lot of cool stuff we could do with technology. I've also written about AI, and I'm fascinated by where tech's moving. But in the book, what I talk about and what I think people take for granted, and you have a background in technology too, so you could appreciate this, but the way human beings organize to solve problems, we've never seen a more effective way to organize human beings to solve problems than the modern tech industry is doing it. So set the technology aside, but look at how we're able to tap into collective human potential, right? And so that's the part of it that I'm just like, wow, like, and I'm exposed to, and Agile changed the way that I work. I am a huge fan of the idea of open source. And how do you get human beings to collaborate towards shared common goals in effective, and often these are kind of flat hierarchies. Often these are really people get a chance to contribute. People feel engaged, and it's also a way to kind of take on the big, well-funded, gigantic, powerful kind of folks out there. So kind of taking the same idea in technology, not the technology itself, even though I'm happy to talk about that. There's a lot to say about that, but it's the way that human beings organize towards collective good and purpose.
So maybe talk about collaboration and its role in mindfulness, perhaps. How does that how are they what's the synergy between them, perhaps?
Well, the case I make in the book is that there's a lack of collaboration, and there's a lack of kind of open source and agile kind of methodology sort of approaches. What we have instead tends to be fiefdoms, it seems to me, and I say this, with my own very direct experience. And when I got involved in mindfulness, I tend to go into things kind of full 100% all in. And I got very active, and got connected and involved in all sorts of different organizations, including Buddhist organizations, including bringing mindfulness schools to schools, prison Dharma programs, one of the largest Western Buddhist organizations in the U.S. Served as a vice chair. Like I go all in. I've done. You might be familiar with the Vipassana Goenka retreats. I've done the Goenka retreats, and so I kind of like to go all in, and got involved in many different things. And there were varying degrees of and I'm also a critical person and critical thinker. And to be quite honest, like I can find flaws in just about anything. So I just want to out that. And I do like to provoke. So just to name all those things up front. And so in everything, I saw some things that I really enjoyed and liked, and everything I saw things that were concerning. And I found that what I was excited about was, how do we unify? Like, how do we bring communities together? Why is it that we're doing this thing over here, on the East Coast, and in the West over there, they're doing this thing, and we're both doing the same thing? Like, why can't we just collaborate and bring everyone together? And in the work that I've done with Mindful Leader, we tried to do that. So we have a thing called the Mindful Leader Summit. We invited, and we started this thing. It's our 10th year anniversary this year. We invited groups and leaders and folks across all the different sort of domains and areas of what I would say were the emergence of mindfulness. And this is like 12 years ago or so, so very early on when this was bubbling up. And what I found was that there were like these pre-existing beefs that these groups and people had with one another that I didn't know anything about, and that they already had these kind of fiefdoms already carved out, and there was sort of, there's already this kind of in-group, out-group thing, and I was just blind and naive, and I stepped into it. I'm like, let's all get together. Mindfulness is this beautiful thing. Like, I'm coming from the software world. I'm like, we've got to build this ecosystem. We've got to do it all open. And people were there was always this polite sort of, okay. And I'm a pretty, I could get very energized when I feel something makes sense. I'll try to push for it. And in the different groups I was part of, there was always a willingness to hear me, but there was never any movement towards the things that I felt quite passionate about that needed to be addressed. So I might be rambling a little bit,
Oh,
but
no, but okay. So you said you like to stir up controversy. I like to be sort of devil's advocate then. And so what's the problem with people just doing their own thing and not sort of collaborating? I mean, assuming that that these people feel that that their sort of meditation practice is this. What are you trying to open up? What are you trying to achieve through open MBSR? What is
what a
it?
great question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that question. So, um, you're right. Like, people can do their own thing and sort of have these closed systems and kind of control them and maintain them in ways that they might see fit. What I'm advocating for is the what I felt was the promise of mindfulness, right? So I got involved in mindfulness because I came out of a very difficult time of my life. I discovered it. It made a lot of sense. I am agnostic, atheist, depending on the day that you ask me. And I'm not looking for a religion. I'm not looking for that. And I personally don't have any, I don't believe in anything that someone claims is like holy or written by God or, divinely
Yeah.
inspired. I don't believe in anything that anyone claims is divinely inspired. And I don't believe in gurus or supernatural humans. So just to give you a stance of where I'm coming.
Yes. 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 Yes.
So
Yes.
so
I'm with you.
outside of those two things, I'm pretty open minded, right? So, but like those two things have led to so much abuse and like power. Like people get taken advantage of, and then there's a certain element of it that I just can't get into. And I believe in the God of Spinoza, and seeing some of your work, I feel like there's probably some similarities in those beliefs. And so for me, I might hang out with like the humanists, the Unitarian Universalists. Like there's different groups, the Quakers, like that I find that I could explore some of these things. And when I got involved with mindfulness, like there was this idea and what I'll call the promise of mindfulness that it was a secular um, uh, uh, approach. It was open to people of any belief. It was inclusive to all humans because we all suffer and we deal with stress and pain and things. And so for me, like the idea of something that could unify and bring us together at a time when we're seeing a collapse in sort of religious institutions. And so a lot of people like me, like don't necessarily have a home to go to or a place to kind of explore and connect and find connection around. And that would be open to anyone, whatever their background is. And I'm not just talking, say diversity for the sake of like, I grew up in a very diverse environment. I'm an immigrant. I've gone through some things. I have a very, very diverse group of friends and grew up around. So diversity for me is just normal. But beyond that, diversity in thought, right? Like I have my own political beliefs, but I've written about how important it is to me that the mindfulness field be open to everyone across the political spectrum. And I feel like it's a real disservice when it becomes a politicalized thing. And to be open to people of different religious backgrounds. And so if, I don't expect everyone to have my same beliefs, but I don't think it's fair for people to have to become Buddhist or pretend to be Buddhist or sort of speak Buddhist language in order to progress in mindfulness teacher training or mindfulness development, right? So I always felt that way. And when I got involved, I was very naive. I was very excited. And I was exposed to, like, I saw this stuff like emerge. Like I was very fortunate to just kind of be at the right place at the right time, have certain access and to see the whole thing bubble up and to see the whole thing veer in a direction that I found concerning. And at the same time, I'm a realist. Like, who am I to like say anything about this? And so, kind of, and I also just felt there was great potential, right? So there's a lot of great people, a lot of great energy and initiative that's gone into the mindfulness field. And so, and on one side, I felt very critical of what was happening. On the other side, I was thrilled to be a part of this beautiful thing and trying to figure out how can I help steer it, and in which ways does my work with my leader make sense? And so how can I actually kind of make a difference? Where can I make a difference? And so thinking about it in a real thoughtful way, not to just like make noise, but like actually drive change.
Yeah. Yeah, boy, it's interesting because there's a bit of irony because my just we kind of in a I practice locally kind of in a Zen group that meets at a Unitarian church and kind of does not have a leader, kind of by design as well. So I haven't, I'm not as sensitive to this, this sort of, I haven't been in contact with sort of this spirit of what you're talking about that you're trying to open up. But to me, there's a part of me that just says this is mindfulness. This is just simple practices. This other stuff about human organizations and how we're going to organize it, that's something else. I mean, that's just basically a sociology, perhaps, and it doesn't get to like what's the basic practice. What's the basic, and I guess that's. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, because basically, I look at sort of mindfulness as sort of an American simplified version of a very traditional Buddhist practice that we've sort of made very simple so that it's more palatable for Americans. But it sort of made it popular because if we would have thrown traditional Buddhism and all the complicated rituals and stuff, Americans wouldn't have been. And you talk about that. So I guess I was sort of uh, going on and on with sort of my reaction to what you're saying.
I appreciate that. And I think for a lot of folks, there is this sense of like, it's not broke. Like in my neck of the woods, like in what I'm doing, I'm not seeing any problem, and I don't see anything wrong, and I'm not sure why there needs to be this kind of idea of reimagining the future of mindfulness, right? And for me, I have a very different view. Like I have more of a
Right.
bird's eye view, and so
Yeah.
when I kind of pull up, I could kind
Well,
of see stuff.
take me up there. Take me up there. I want to get this view of why we, because it's not a religion. It's not a religion, and I
Well,
think both of us are very anti-clerical, anti-guru, and so uh, what's going to be the bird's eye view? How do you see that? See like the ecosystem of mindfulness throughout the country that would be collaborative and
Well, I'll give you a sense of where I see things now, because I told someone I'm like, mindfulness is in a very dangerous place, and maybe I'll just back up a little bit and talk about, because there's so many different definitions of what mindfulness is and what meditation is, and I do think it's helpful to just have a little bit of clarity, and just very briefly, I'll say, when I look at mindfulness, it's a basic human capacity, and it's this capacity to be in the moment without judgment, and maybe have a sense of curiosity about that. There's this idea of trait mindfulness and state mindfulness when you look at some of the research done around it, whereas trait mindfulness is sort of this ongoing capacity that you develop and you kind of harness and hone. Whereas state mindfulness might be you do like a 2-minute breath exercise, and you're in that state for maybe like a minute, maybe two, but you're kind of in that state. Right. And so when I think of mindfulness, it sort of has this real kind of innateness to it. And there are different, you mentioned earlier that you've been exploring some Sufi related things. And I think it's fair to say that in different forms, in different ways, that different groups have learned how to play with this idea of mindfulness. And so, even though in Buddhism there has been this real depth, and I don't think you could find that kind of depth anywhere else, I wouldn't say it's completely exclusive to Buddhism. So, to kind of invite the thought that it's something more universal, and that there's different traditions and different ways people might have honed it. I think even if you look at modern day, that there's been some incredible work around like sports psychology that one might say was more mindfulness geared before we had this moment that we're having now. And there are some places where mindfulness and sports psychology got mixed together. People like George Mumford and others. But so I kind of want to kind of pull those two pieces apart a little bit and say, hey, like mindfulness is something that in Buddhism, Buddhist traditions have helped understand how to better develop and hone, but I wouldn't say they're exclusive to Buddhism. And the next thing that I would um, try to push for is that it doesn't need to be entangled with Buddhism. And I think that's one of the major issues. So in the book and in my work and just trying to figure out like how do I pinpoint the different things that I'm seeing are problematic in the current state of the mindfulness field. And this work for me started almost 7 years ago, and I had shared, and our company does a lot on social media, and at the time, I don't know, we had like maybe 40,000 Facebook followers, and we posted an article about how a nonprofit organization that happened to be run by a friend of mine in New England was being sued by a Christian right-wing organization. And we just posted this, and our audience, and it was like it was a maybe press release or something from that organization that was suing them. So it's sort of like, hey, here's what's happening from their perspective. Our audience freaked out. This mindful, compassionate audience said to me things like, you guys are idiots, like unfollow, like I can't believe you guys are sharing this. And if you think back about 7 years or so, it was a different environment where people were uh, maybe concerned about anything that was being put out there and kind of quick to react. But if I fast forward a little bit, what I realize is that there is no criticism, there is no critique. That the critics of the mindfulness field, where do you find them, right? And then in my mind, it kind of got the hamster wheel rolling, and I was like, wait a minute, like, why is there no debate, right? Like in the mindfulness field as a whole, like where is the debate happening? And in my mind, and I'm a computer engineer, and in my background, I've almost went the science route. It's like, wait a minute, like if we don't have debate, like how do we harden? How do we challenge one another? And so I took it upon myself to find the critics of the mindfulness field. And so the lead plaintiff in this work against the schools was this woman by the name of Candy Brown. So who is this lady? Found out she's a professor, University of Indiana, with a PhD in religious studies from Harvard. So this isn't some like wonky, angry person that's just like, she's got a background. I also connected with folks like Ron Purser, who at the time was talking about mindfulness and sort of the effect of capitalism, and David Forbes, who with Ron Purser ran this great thing called the Mindful Cranks, where they were the only guys I knew like talking to the critics. And then Glenn Wallace and Jamie Kucinich, I might be saying her last name wrong, wrote a book, The Mindful Elite, right? And so there was this like kind of hidden group of critics out there. And I was like, wow, like we need to engage these people. And I engaged them. And the conversations were so energizing. And it just got me thinking, like I kind of felt like I stepped away from the echo chamber of like, critical thinking is bad. Like in some of these mindfulness circles, it almost felt like critical thinking was discouraged, and me with my provocative kind of energy, and sometimes my tone might be off a little bit. I felt kind of neutered and quieted, and sort of like I had to show up in this like different way. And I thought, okay, well, maybe there's something wrong with me, and I'm not doing this right, and I need to do deeper inner work, and I'll show up and sort of behave like these walking zombies, right? And so I I went and engaged the critics, and like really, really changed my perspective on things. I invited Professor Candy Brown to one of our summits. I had her on stage debating the person at the time that was running New York Department of Education's mindfulness programs statewide. I had David Forbes, who did a critique of mindfulness, partnered with one of the larger training companies around mindfulness that spun out of Google, Search Inside Yourself, had them kind of team up and debate the CEO of that organization at the time. And nobody asked for this. Nobody thought it was a good idea, but the audience was energized. Like they were just like, whoa. And I could tell you that engagement with the critics early on, I think, helped me steer Mindful Leader in a way that we've survived. Like there's a lot of organizations I feel that kind of got lost in this kind of Kool-Aid echoey chamber stuff, lost touch with reality, and haven't been able to navigate what sometimes has been difficult.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was as you were talking, I was wondering if one of the difficulties you're running into is the propensity of mindfulness to um, uh, there's so much of an emphasis on trying to connect with direct reality and not the machinations of the human mind, the monkey mind. And so when you get this idea of debate and dialectic and people arguing both sides, that to some extent could be construed as the quote unquote monkey mind. And what the my sort of whatever it is, what I'm trying to do is sort of connect with the reality that's not based upon the mind but the heart anyway. So even lower down the tendon or the ass, whatever, anything but the mind. The mind is this thing flickering on and off. So and I'm wondering if that's the tension that you're running into, because that sort of propensity to sort of try to connect with things outside of the mind lends itself to more unitary totalitarian structures that we're against, perhaps.
Well, I appreciate that. And so for me, early on in my exploration of mindfulness, what I found was through deep practice, I could change the way I perceive reality. And that was just like, whoa, like that was like, holy moly. And this is, without psychedelics, like there's a shortcut to that. This is without psychedelics. And in a way, it was like really trying to connect with that sensory experience, right? Like that the raw kind of intake.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think there's and it's extraordinary, done the 10-day retreats. Like I've gone into places that just have been really fascinating and bizarre and sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes very uncomfortable, and sometimes joyful and blissful, like all that, right? And if you look at more of kind of the Buddhist approach in meditation and mindfulness, often these practices were meant for monks and for religious people. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because they were free from worldly responsibilities. Unlike me, they didn't have a mortgage, they didn't have a job, they didn't have kids. And so for me, I could tap into that mode, but I can't stay there because reality and life demands something else. And I believe that, and I struggle with this, right? Like to try to kind of figure out how to bring that into the world that we exist in. And the conclusion I've come to is we have to balance, right? We've got to be this dialectical idea of kind of holding two opposites. I wrote an article how the 9 attitudes of mindfulness do harm. I wrote another article like about please shut up, your guided meditations doing harm, to just get people to think. And in my own personal experience, when I found myself in this state of like goals don't matter, like just let go, and sort of that almost like monk-like attitude, often it would lead to really unpleasant, ungraceful decisions and things that I would find myself, unfortunately, sometimes harming relationships and screwing up. Like I don't know how else to put it. And so I also come from the leadership side and the business side, and I think because of that, it's forced me to look at things in a different way and find what makes sense going forward. Like how do we make this actually work? And the most read article on Mindful Leader right now is an article I wrote called Dialectic Thinking: The Secret to Exceptional Mindful Leadership. Organically, it has 47,000 reads. And so for me, this idea of dialectical thinking is essential to helping people learn and develop mindfulness in a way that is actually not harmful. Like just to put it bluntly, I think if you don't have that balance, you could find yourself in sort of a state of mind that I was in, and I feel like many folks might be in, where the practice actually could, if you don't go about it correctly, could lead you to a point that you lose kind of cognitive and psychological flexibility, and you become less resilient.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, and just to give you a quick example of what this might look like, and again, like the business world sort of exposed this to me, and I have my own problems with the business world. Like we can talk about capitalism and all that, but I do believe we could learn from everywhere. Right. And so this was from Satya Nadella, the current CEO of Microsoft. I did some work with Steve Ballmer and way in my previous life, and Microsoft was different. And Satya Nadella came along, and I was reading an interview with him, and he said, when I was at Microsoft, I had to accept Microsoft and love it for what it was completely. And he was, they picked him because he was there. He sort of understood the culture. And at the same time, I had to figure out how to drive change and make things better. And holding those two opposites, acceptance and change, right? And there's ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, but this idea of like holding acceptance and change, these two almost opposites at the same time, to me is one of the keys to really navigating life in an honest, authentic, real way. I would argue sometimes when people kind of lean too much to the accept everything, it's not real. Like it's sort of in a place that isn't grounded. And I'll give you another. Like I saw a girl the other day wore a shirt that said, "I'm perfect just the way I am." And there's the old saying, I forget who said it, like, "You're perfect just the way you are, and you could be better," right? And so, like for me, it's like you have to have both those. And if you lean one way or the other too much, it could become unhealthy. But if you could hold those two things at the same time, I feel like that is, for me, been an extraordinary, much more stable, much more resilient, much more cognitive flexibility, and I've been able to more or less kind of unlock the benefits of mindfulness without this potential downside.
Yeah. So are you focused more on the actual practice of mindfulness, the quote unquote meditation or whatever you're doing, uh, or are you focused more on sort of the social organizations behind it, or both? I mean, obviously,
Yes.
this is they're more than you're multifaceted, and that's the whole point of what you're
Yes.
saying. But still, there seems to be, it's well. Go ahead.
Well. So what I would argue is you can't necessarily separate those two things, right? And so, kind of the Hegelian Marxists, like the people who form the institutes affect the institutes affect the people, and so you kind of have this back and forth. And maybe like I'll give you a little bit of the sense of the approach of the book, because I was racking my brain, like I'm trying to change the direction of mindfulness. Like how crazy is that, right? And so like I was racking my brain, like how can I actually maybe help nudge this, or at least get people thinking, at least get people talking. I don't know if this is going to be the end all, but my hopes is like to get people to think and look at this and say, wait a minute, like what is the future? Like, is anyone thinking about the vision for the future of mindfulness? Like, where are we heading? And just to back up to something that you might have said, a question you had earlier, when I look at what's happening in the mindfulness field, generally, when I zoom up, you kind of have certain winners and then you have sort of losers, right? The winners are Calm, Headspace, the apps, right? They've blown up. Everybody knows the apps. Everybody uses the apps. The winners are often more of these like celebrity guru type teachers, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
this guy, Dr. Spinoza, not Spinoza, sorry. I forget.
Dispensa, dispensa.
Dispensa, right? Right. And so like these guys, they're winning. They're winning. The Deepak Chopras have always sort of won. And I would argue like there's other people that and I want to be careful not to sort of like kind of call out everyone, but there's people I would say in the Buddhist world too that sort of had this Buddhist celebrity teacher status. They're doing great. Um, Often it's always been like the teacher training institutes that will charge like 10, 7,000 to like $20,000 to train teachers. They were doing great, but now I feel like there's sort of a drying up of the pipeline. And I've heard some teachers like have made millions like creating these programs, like Buddhist teachers that are started by really kind of building their following in a Buddhist spiritual community, and then turned around and converted, monetized that, right? Like, and that's another thing I write about that frustrates me. And so those are the winners. Who are the losers? Mindful Leader is the largest MBSR provider in the world. Over the last 5 years, we've taught thousands of people MBSR. We pivoted to MBSR because I felt it was more in alignment with the promise of mindfulness that I described to you earlier. And to my surprise, and I don't know if I'd say full surprise, but as we dug into it, what I found was even within MBSR, there's sort of this kind of what I would say in front of the curtain presentation and then behind the curtain presentation, right? And so when you have this, there's this uneasiness. So when we're in our closed circle, we could say whatever we want. And when we're in front of other people, we've got to change our language, our words, and how we present this. But to come back to what I was saying, like the idea of having more organic, small communities where people are uniting with each other, sharing mindfulness and learning and teaching, and then bonding together and forming close relationships and intentional community, right? Like these are the things. Like for me, like we have a loneliness epidemic I've been following since the Surgeon General first wrote about it during Obama, and then Vivek Murthy, and then came back and wrote about it, and promoted it around Biden. So we have this loneliness epidemic, and for me, it's like we need reasons to like put the computer down and like hang out with other human beings, and yet now what we have is this concentration of power with these like celebrity
Yeah.
type
Okay.
gurus. We've got the technology companies taking over. And so, you're fortunate to have what you have, but I would imagine that your community and the folks that you formed around might have formed before all this. The younger generation is the
Yeah.
people that
Yeah.
are new to mindfulness.
Right.
They
Right.
think it's an app. They think it's, worshiping a celebrity teacher.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because I was going to get you went through the list of teachers, and one teacher that just came back with me, because I'm with you. I mean, I think all those mindfulness teachers, I just listened to them for a while, and I just can't take it, because but Thich Nhat Hanh, he seems to, and again, I've never, not, when he was alive, had not met him personally, but just listening to him and sort of the communities that he formed, and sort of, but very socially active. And I didn't, you know what, I was wondering if that's something you explored, sort of, what he was about, perhaps, as maybe as sort of a, somebody that it's, if, and I look at all of this as mindfulness as, it's a big human ecosystem, but, that seemed to be a pretty strong tree that was growing with him.
Yes, and I have nothing bad to say about Thich Nhat Hanh. I mean, there's some things that he explored and some areas that he went down that I didn't resonate with me. That felt a
Yeah.
little more, spiritual and maybe
Yeah.
pseudoscientific and sort of beyond what I would kind of accept fully. But I do feel like he's had a tremendous impact. The question for me though that sometimes comes up is when we have these very kind of personality, and I would even, maybe not personality might not be the right word, but an individual led movement, then often when the individual is gone, like it's been set up
Right.
from the beginning to operate like a kingdom, like a fiefdom, right? And so if Thich Nhat Hanh's not there needs to be somebody else who's sort of the guru. Like he's a good guru, but he's still kind of a guru, right? And so if you have a guru centric organization or approach, you're going to need someone to
Well,
take
like,
that place.
who took over for Steve Jobs, and how'd he do?
Well, it's okay
And
if you want to maintain that style, right? So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, and there's certain lineages and traditions where you do have that, like kind of a handing off. But I prefer the model where it's And I'm intentionally like, you're not going to find me guiding a meditation out there. You're not going to find my face like all over. Like I'm trying to model like what it might look like to have a truly community-based approach. And be at the same time, I know I have to get out there and talk to folks and share what we're doing and like do the whole thing. And I've struggled with that a little bit, but for me, the nightmare would be to become a Thich Nhat Hanh figure, right? Because once that happens, then the movement is kind of locked in that way.
Okay. And so let's I mean, because, and I think it was, if you wanted to talk about, you talked about Hegel, but what somebody like Max Weber, who talks about social organization, you've got like a charismatic figure, you've got a Jesus, and then you've got then the apostles or the people that are the administrators afterwards. I mean, that's sort of like traditionally how these movements, quasi-religious, have kind of evolved, right? And so maybe your model is different, perhaps, that you don't start with the charismatic leader, perhaps,
Well,
or how does it work? Because throughout
yes,
history, humans have
yes.
been, the charismatic leader has, go.
I,
I'm sorry, you're smiling, so I need
I
to
was
let you go.
smiling because in the tech world, it's not that way, right? And of
Yeah,
course, you have your Jobs and you have your Elon Musk and you have people like that.
yeah,
But if you like to look at the agile methodology and you ask yourself, who is the guy who created the agile methodology? Nobody could answer that question because it wasn't one guy. It was a collaborative of like 12 small
okay,
organizations that were all
sure.
doing rapid software development that got together, and, did the thing. I mean, I'm not a big crypto fan, but if you look at like Bitcoin, like Satoshi, nobody even knows who he is. And so you could do this like crazy huge thing and
Yeah,
like it disappear. I mean, how cool is that? So, and I think with AI now, like, I mean, shoot, like uh, AI is going to be able to take on any guru or human in a few years, and so the AIs will become could dangerously become the gurus. And so for me, when I look at all this, and to kind of pull back a little, so MBSR has done some wonderful things, and with what John Kabat-Zinn has done, it's fantastic. He's kind of at a point where he's retiring and pulling back, and so MBSR has some great components. And but the idea around open MBSR is like, let's take what's working, let's build off of it. We already have, a lot of things that have been proven and demonstrated, and we just want to add some transparency. We want to add some structure around it. And so with the book, the first part, I go into the foundation. I talk about MBSR. I talk about openly, transparently, in a way that I don't think has been done so much before. I talk about the Buddhist origins. Like, you see this in MBSR. Here's where it comes from. I'm not hiding it. I'm not pretending that it's not there. Expose the whole thing. Second part of the book, I talk about the problems in the field, and I identify them as three to kind of make it simple: Buddhist entanglement, one-dimensional thinking, and kind of this elitist oligarchical kind of control. And for each problem, I have a solution. So Buddhist entanglement, the solution is disentanglement. And the very simple way that I've learned, it took me forever to figure out the right language. Currently, I would argue we are recontextualizing Buddhism, where it's still Buddhism. There's still this kind of connection. There's still all these relationships to Buddhist teachers and institutions. And what we need to do is we need to derive, because once we derive, we're independent. And I make the argument that Buddhism itself was derived from Vedic traditions and Hindu traditions. And it wasn't until it became derived that it was able to independently develop, innovate, grow, create its own thing, right? So as long as we're kind of entangled with Buddhism, there's going to be this weird, sometimes not transparent, sometimes dishonest, sometimes double speak, where it's like we're teaching Buddhism, and there's been accusations of stealth Buddhism by people, by the critics, in particular Candy Brown, and in that lawsuit I talked about earlier, they were suing these organizations saying, "Hey, you're delivering stealth Buddhism in state schools, and that's not okay. Like, we're not allowed to bring Christianity into schools. You guys are trying to sneak in Buddhism." And so for me, I have no intention of secretly converting people to Buddhism. But at the same time, when John Kabat-Zinn started MBSR, when all this started, a lot of the folks, they had nowhere else to go. Like, there was just the Buddhist organizations, there were just the Buddhist teachers, there were just the Buddhist retreats. And what we found is that we haven't decoupled. We haven't really become independent. We haven't derived and established our own identity, our own institutions, and our own way forward, right? And so that's one of the key things for me. Like the Buddhist entanglement, and everybody knows it, but we sort of sometimes bypass it. I remember once talking to someone, they're like, I want to get into meditation teacher training. And so I went and now I signed up for this Buddhist retreat. I'm doing all this Buddhist stuff. And for me, there was this like, wait a minute, like, what about the people who don't want to go to Buddhist retreats, that aren't interested, aren't willing, or maybe might be close to that? Like we've basically eliminated them all. But for me, more bluntly, I feel like we're lying. I feel like we're being deceptive. And if we're not able to get clear about what we're doing, like I'm not okay with the in front of the curtain, we talk this way, behind the curtain, we drop into like Buddhist language, right? I'm not okay with that. I'm saying let's actually be independent in a way that we could now sort of define and carry things forward, right? So that's the first piece. And you can imagine in some ways it affects how we practice. And like, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. The second piece is one-dimensional thinking. We talked a little bit about this already. So this idea of having dialectic thinking, we go from one-dimensional to two-dimensional. We're already in a very polarized world. You know, the algorithms, everything is trying to get us to think a certain way, and confirmation bias and echo chambers and all of that. And so not only do I think two-dimensional thinking will help us in terms of what's happening to mindfulness and sort of having debate, thinking critically, being able to say, you know, yes, we could kind of tap into this extraordinary sensory raw experience, and we could think critically. Like we could do both those things. And you know, I would argue that it's very important to do both those things to be mentally stable, like for the actual purpose of what we claim mindfulness could help people with. And so going from one-dimensional to two-dimensional thinking, when it comes to the oligarchical kind of control and elitism, there's this real danger in superiority, inferiority complex. I see it in the mindfulness field all over the place. Sometimes it's reinforced by, you know, it's kind of pseudoscience-y stuff, and people think, oh, you know, my brain's better than your brain because I've meditated more, right? And so I must be a better human being. And you would think that, and then you have these guys that are, you know, running, you know, kind of worship monk-like people that turn around and turn into predatory, you know, rapists, right? And so it's like, hey, you could meditate 100 hours a day or whatever, and you could still be an awful human being. And I feel like we need to recognize that. And whenever you concentrate power, like for me, and for me, for the longest time, the question I kept asking over and over again that no one wanted to address is, you know, how do we talk about power? Like why aren't we talking about power? Who's got the power? How are things being done? Like why aren't we talking about this? And so for me, instead of this weird quasi fiefdom, it almost feels like a royal court, and whether it's MBSR or other things where there's a smaller group of people, often based on Buddhist lineage and tradition, Buddhist backgrounds, making decisions for those of us who bought into this secular promise, doing it in a closed way. I'm saying let's bust that all open. Let's make it egalitarian. Let's open this up, reveal, release, be transparent, and figure out how we could really let the community have a voice. And in Buddhist traditions, often the community serves the teacher. They see them as an enlightened super being that needs to be served, and they serve the teacher, right? And sometimes I've seen that happen in the West, whereas more Western spiritual traditions, and not all of them, but often the community picks the leader, and the leader is supposed to serve the community, right? And so I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but for me, ultimately, we've got to be honest about the Buddhist roots, acknowledge them, and derive and disentangle from them. We've got to be clear about the danger of one-dimensional thinking, and remember that this two-dimensional dialectic way is what leads to actual mental kind of stability, health, and resilience. And we've got to figure out how to really democratize and flatten and make transparent and open up this whole thing, because that's what's going to lead, you know, that's the mindfulness I want my kids to have. That's the mindfulness that I think will be around 400 years from now. What we're seeing right now, I think, is going to collapse. And I would argue that this, you know, might be like the second wave of mindfulness in the West after what happened in the 60s. This is like the second wave. And my hopes is that what I'm promoting and encouraging might be the third wave, where it's like maybe on the, if you're in the tech world, usually it's the third time you get it right. And so I'm pushing for the third time. Maybe what I'm proposing isn't it. Maybe someone else comes along, but we need a third, attempt, because the way things are set up now, it's already failing, and it's gonna continue down that way.
Okay. So I have 25-year-old daughters. Assume they move to a community and are interested in establishing, or well, I mean that's just it. What would you recommend they do to connect with a mindfulness program? And or am I looking at it the wrong way? Yeah. Just I mean, what sort of yeah? Go ahead. I'll let you. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to riff for a minute, because I think that there's some important elements. So the first thing is that I think you need to be very careful, because there are so many of these kind of guruistic, kind of teacher-centric approaches out there that could create dependencies, and could create sort of other possible power abuses, right? And so I argue that ultimately the vision for mindfulness I have is your daughter or anyone should be able to learn to meditate on their own, in silence, without a teacher. And that any good teacher will start with that in mind. That, hey, I'm going to guide you, but my guidance is meant to help you learn how to be independent and autonomous, so that without my guidance, if you're sitting in silence, you'll be able to meditate without me, without any, you don't need guidance, right? And so, and I could pause there for a moment. So that's a starting point. Like, we want to teach people how to meditate on their own, to develop the ability to do this without a dependency. Quite often I feel like what's happening now, the guidance is almost turning into like entertainment. It's turning into like kind of like spiritual entertainment, like someone's taking you for a ride. And within open MBSR, we don't do visualizations. There's a lot of things that we're very clear about, because there are potentials for abuse, and there's potentials for things to go in a different direction, and when you guide someone in a visualization. And so for us, the idea is like, let's stick to the practices like awareness of breath, body scans. We call loving kindness meta practice, expanding well wishes, because that's what it does, and we don't want to kind of insert any sort of emotional or anything. And so it's back to your practices. Like, we've modified the practices, but the whole thing doesn't work unless any movement. I believe you need to identify the ends, and you need to identify the means, right? And there's the old kind of Machiavellian saying, the ends justify the means. But I believe that in order to have debate, in order to have a community, you need to define the parameters. And the two parameters that are essential, so we know what the hell we're doing, is where are we going, and what's okay and what's not okay. So the ends being like the goal, the outcome, and the means being the principles, right? And so in open MBSR, we define these two things for open MBSR. Here are the ends, here are the means.
What is the end? What is the end, if you don't mind me asking?
Yes, and so there's five of them, and so and it's based on MBSR, to be quite open. And so there is, and I'll tell you exactly what they are. And it's very important, because I feel like these give us, because we want to encourage debate, we want to encourage critical thinking, we want to encourage the community. But if we don't have these parameters, then it just goes all over the place. And so the five outcomes, one is practicing mindfulness. And so we believe in the idea of formal practice. Like, there's all these informal ways, all these other things that you could do, but we do believe in sitting and practicing. So in MBSR and in open MBSR, we've really focused on awareness of breath, which obviously has Buddhist roots, and Anapanasati type practices. We have the body scan, which is connected to Vipassana. We've got open awareness and other things, but each of them is labeled in a way that we're not telling you, like awareness of breath. I'm not telling you you're going to be calm. I'm not telling you that you're going to, be connected or grounded. I'm just telling you what the practice is. It's awareness of breath. That's what we're practicing. Your experience might be different than mine. Body scan. We're just scanning the body. Your experience might be different than mine. Like, I don't want to insert anything on you.
Yeah. Well, and that's just basic shikantaza. I mean, that's not. Yeah. So
Exactly. But the way that we frame it, the way that we talk about it's important, because we want, and we will recognize where it came from, but at the same time, we want to label it for what it is, versus like trying to kind of force a outcome within the practice itself, right? So the practice itself, the name of the practice doesn't have an outcome baked into it. We're just awareness of breath. But we've got the practices, we've got the attitudinal mindsets and foundations. And so John Kabat-Zinn had the 9 attitudes. In Open MBSR, we have the 9+1 attitudes, or the 9+ attitudes, where essentially all I do is I add dialectic thinking and then go back and say for each of these attitudes that John's done a great job of putting out there, like we need a counterbalance. And so there might be this idea of letting go, but still having an orientation towards something. Like there's nothing wrong with goals. And all this is detailed in the book. And I just want to be conscious of time. I know we could go over a bit, but I don't want to. I want to be careful. As far as timing goes, how long can we go? So I don't feel rushed.
You can do as long as you want. So or a short. Typically they're an hour, but I'm
gotcha.
I'm so go ahead. And again, I don't mean to go ahead and I probably interrupted you too much. So go ahead.
No. Please.
Yeah.
I like the back and forth. So sometimes if I'm going too long and you don't jump in, I'll pause and be like, and check in. So just give you a sense of how these attitudes align. So the original attitudes are non-judging, patience, beginner's mind, trust, non-striving, acceptance, letting go, gratitude, generosity, right? All wonderful things. But if you do them in a one-dimensional way, like dangerous things could happen. Like we need to be, like if someone knocks on your door and they are looking, or someone's knocking on your door and they have a gun or a knife, like, it's okay to keep the door locked. Like it's okay to be critical. And so for non-judging and critical engagement, patience and proactive change, beginner's mind and leveraging experience, trust and discernment, non-striving and goal orientation, acceptance and advocacy for change, letting go and emotional engagement, gratitude and acknowledging challenges, generosity and boundaries, right? And so we need these counters. And so what I'm trying to do is make the fewest tweaks possible to build off of this incredible work that's already been done, but to really, in some ways, make it honest and make it practical and make it community-based.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful.
And so there's a few more. So we've got the attitudes, we've got practicing the skills, and part of Open MBSR and MBSR is this idea of understanding stress and resilience, right? And so understanding stress, I mean, you could also say it's kind of like understanding suffering. So we need to have an understanding of these things and getting into the science and understanding what's stressing us and stressors, so that we know how to apply these mindsets and attitudes and these practices towards that. We believe in applying mindfulness in daily life. And so how do we make this something that we could practice throughout the day, whether we're at work, whether we're, at the gym, maybe we're at the field competing, whatever we might be doing, like how do we apply this daily? And then probably the most important to me, and, you'll hear me obsess about community, is fostering intentional community. Like if we don't get to a point that we have intentional community around this, it's going to fail. Like community is what provides longevity, provides resilience, provides innovation. And so, and I know for me, and it sounds like, you've got a group that you've been connected to. My practice slips the most when I don't have that group, when I don't have those friends that I could go to.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
And it's interesting but the internet though kind of provides that community even, and the sources of information. So even though that we don't have even if we live in a small town that doesn't have, a group of people that are into that, there's just so much out there that we could connect with so many groups, and for good or bad, obviously, but this is like there's so much opportunity around us to connect. And maybe it's not, maybe the direct human connection is also important as opposed to, through internet, but still there's so much. Our ability to connect with ideas is unparalleled, and it's almost like we're part of this vast human network, and the no self really is taking over. Even there's a sort of like a force to join us all together, in a way that allows us to explore so many things that we didn't have access to. Even when I was a kid, there were no books on human or Buddhism or mindfulness-based stress reduction when I was a kid. And now, they're all over the place. I mean, it's just wonderful, the resources that are available.
You're absolutely right about all the different ways folks can connect now. And just one quick thing I'll mention, and I mentioned early on when we were talking about technology, we launched a thing called Meditate Together. It's just meditatetogether.com, where people could go and wherever they are, whatever wherever they might be located, we have this wonderful international community every hour, 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. For the last 5 years, we had people meditating with other human beings on Zoom. Like, it was crazy. Like, imagine every hour, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., like around the world. Finally, I decided, you know what, we're going to build this thing. And we basically rebuilt Zoom-like interface where you join on the hour. And when you join, often there'll be someone who will claim host, and you'll have a host for the session. You'll have the option to pick silence. You could pick awareness of breath, body scan. Both these practices are built to help you learn how to meditate on your own. We have nature sounds, and you meditate with a group of people. At the end of it, there's a checking question. What were you grateful for? Or something to just get people to connect who want to connect. So you might drop off if you're not interested. If you want to build community and connect with others, you can. At the end of the session, you could friend other people. You could chat with folks. And the whole idea is, how can we create a very community-based platform? And even if you're meditating on your own, you could go there and do it with other people. And there's a real beauty to that. And I always found that for me, it's the best way to ensure that I actually do my daily practice. When I have other people, when people kind of miss me when I'm not there, this group gets to know you. And there's this really wonderful feeling of connection through technology in a way that I would say really embodies the spirit of Open MBSR. So we've created it. We've got hundreds of folks that are on there already, and we're in beta, but we'll be opening it up soon for others to check out if they're curious. So I think technology could serve a great means to help do that. And for me, I decided to. And you know how hard software development is. We did it with a shoestring budget. We're not a huge company, but for me, it was important to have this done and ready and out there as the book's coming out, so that there's this real live, organic platform where people can kind of see this in action. So it's not just ideas, but it's alive. But the thing that I wanted to make sure to mention, we talked about the outcomes. We have these 5 outcomes. We have these 7 principles. And between the outcomes and principles, that sort of forms the ends and the means and gives us the boundaries so we could have healthy, wonderful debates and challenge. And even already with our MBSR teachers, we've got some fantastic MBSR teachers that are the most experienced MBSR teachers out there with the number of courses that they've taught with us and beyond. And already we're having these internal debates, and the principles and the outcomes are what are kind of forming them. So I'll share them very quickly, and then share where people could find out more. So the 7 principles: act with integrity and transparency. And a lot of these just seem commonsensical, but they're important to state. Ground in scientific evidence and reason. And so I feel that there's often different things people might believe, but when our beliefs come together, they're usually reason-based. And so we really have to remember that. And science kind of is where we could truly unite. Engage critically and think dialectically. And so to counter this often stagnant sort of echo chamber fear of speaking up, we want people to engage critically. We're inviting it, and we're making it part of part of the cake, right? It's like embedded, so you can't remove it. And so hopefully it'll help us avoid the same mistakes that I've seen happen otherwise. We want to embrace diversity and encourage and ensure accessibility. And so, beyond in all the ways diversity that I mentioned earlier, I wrote an article about how mindfulness has become a luxury belief. And to me, that's like I grew up with simple means and not and so for me, like, I want this to be accessible to anyone, regardless of their income, regardless of what they were born into. um, we want to empower individuals and respect autonomy in the ways that I mentioned around guided meditations and sort of some of these real attaching ways in which capitalism and guru kind of culture lead down a path of dependency and sometimes abuse. We want to avoid all that. We want to learn from direct experience and collective wisdom. And so it's, I have my direct experience, you have your direct experience. Let's share those and connect and unite around that. We want to adapt continuously and cultivate growth. And so we never want to be stagnant. We want to challenge, we want to innovate. And again, like, I believe all these things are foundational to creating something that will last possibly for centuries to come, and that kind of self-corrects and self-improves at both the kind of framework level and in the community that it's serving.
Wonderful, wonderful. So what's the best way to people to participate in this all this mischief you have going on, perhaps?
Thank you for saying that. I can't be a little rascally and
Yeah.
mischievous. So mindfulleader.org is the organization's website where everything is, and we've got a lot of stuff going on there that I would invite folks to check out. For the book, we do have a page for the book, Open MBSR, OpenMBSR.com, and people could go there. They could order. There's a free chapter to download and check out. It's available for pre-order right now on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, like your favorite retailers. You should be able to find it out there. And my hopes are that as the book is like not like the book isn't the end, it's the beginning. And so the idea is to really get people excited and to figure out how to come together in community and collaborate and help this grow. And so we are still figuring out what that all looks like, but just to know, like, the book isn't the end goal. We're working with our MBSR teachers. We're trying to create an open MBSR teacher curriculum and open MBSR resources, put it out freely, let people contribute, build off of it, trying to figure out the creative licensing, trying to figure out the governance, right? And so there's all these components. And for me, like, I'm hoping to be the spark, but then, as I mentioned earlier, like, it's got to be done in a community way in order for it to truly be community based. And so I'm trying to spark it. I'm trying to kind of help the lift and get it going. And often it does take an individual to kind of do that, but I'm trying to do that in a way that very quickly and early we get the community active. And already our MBSR teachers, we've got a certification program, our certified workplace facilitators and an advisory group has been contributing, like, from the beginning. When I started this thing, like, I've been collaborating, getting people's feedback and baking it in. And that's the way we want to continue. So openmbsr.com. Right now we'll have the book, but eventually it'll become more of a hub and a central place for people who want to be part of defining the future of mindfulness, who believe in this idea of a community-centric approach, who agree with these principles, who agree with the idea of having these outcomes and what these outcomes are. And I think that there could be a really beautiful future for mindfulness that our children and their children and their children and generations to come could benefit from.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Mo. Did you want to? You mentioned. Did you want to end with a guided, or that's kind of no? I mean, this is like that's not what you're about. That's not what you're about, right?
No. But I'm happy to end with silence. I mean,
yeah, no, that's
often,
yeah, and I guess yeah, there's enough. No, let's I appreciate your time, and I'll put all this in. And thank you very much for what you're doing.
Thank you, Michael. Quite honestly, I wasn't sure how you might react, and part of me has this slight fear of like, because some people have been less excited. They felt more threatened by what I'm saying and doing.
No, and I applaud you. I just it's so different because because you like you're trying to.
But one quick thing I'll say about the silence is it means something different to everyone, right? And so for some people it's contemplative, for some people it might have a spiritual feel, for some people it might be mental fitness, for some people it might be therapeutic. And what I'm saying is that that's okay. Like you show up, and if it helps you, that's great. But here are the things that we're connecting around, and that we're gonna sort of be united around. But that doesn't mean that you can't have your own beliefs. It just means that you can't show up and push your beliefs on me, right? Like I don't like when people show up and they're like, they're kind of pushing the Buddhist or even like saying like namaste and even ringing Buddhist bells, like all this stuff. Like we don't do Buddhist. I know it sounds crazy, right? But this was a Candy Brown thing. Like we don't use Buddhist bells. I use Buddhist bells forever. And then I saw this and I was like, whoa, like I never had a problem with Buddhist bells, but then I'm already in, right? Like I'm already part of the community. Like I'm already kind of bought in, and we're trying to get others in. And I had a conversation I'll share with you with a guy in Singapore, and he's done some training MBSR, and he went to an office setting and was running a meditation. He had his Buddhist bells, and when he rang them, people started laughing. And he was like, what happened? They're like, you're not supposed to, those are religious things. Like, what are you doing bringing those to the office, right? And so I think sometimes because we're so used to something, we don't challenge it until we talk to someone outside of our kind of aura community mindset. And when you do that, like you're absolutely right. Like the stuff that my approach sounds like different and unique and independent, but it's all like logical. Like for me, it's like sometimes just being able to cut through the noise is what I feel like I'm doing.
Yeah.
There's nothing brilliant or special about it, but it's just like kind of cutting through the noise and saying, hey, wait a minute. Like, why were we doing that? Like why didn't we consider this? And my hopes is that people will be open to it, and we'll see.
No, I wish you the best of luck, Mo.
Awesome.
And we'll keep in touch. I'll keep track of your mischievous activities and your 96 thesis that you've paid. Is it 96 or how many theses did Luther put on the church? The protest. Start. Yeah.
It's funny you say that. I did a talk about the Reformation, and I tried to draw the parallels. I tried, and I was like, look, like we're selling indulgences, we're selling serenity
and society needs critics, people that are willing to, and I think the devil's advocate, and I think that I think there's a role for people, that definitely, I mean, for us, to people that are just not going to follow what, we're always going to be criticizing everything, which is, or I'm speaking for myself, but we're not going to go with the flow. It's like,
I love that.
It's like, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that?
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad we've connected.
Yeah.
And really appreciated and enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Mo. Have a good one.
Thanks, Mo. Take care.
This is the End of the Road podcast with your host, Michael Coco. Exploring the horizons we never touch because we're already there.